A disabled black mom gives food to a lonely biker, thinking it's just a small act of kindness. But by sunset, her quiet house becomes the center of a storm, because 800 Hell's Angels now stand guard at her gate. The neighbors whisper she's lost her mind. The police call it a threat. But to her, it's simple. No one leaves her table hungry. Still, this isn't just about one meal. Behind those roaring engines are men with pasts darker than the road they ride, and the world isn't ready for what happens when mercy meets rebellion. As faith and fear collide, one woman's courage will test an entire town's idea of love, race, and redemption. So when the sun goes down and the engines rise, who will God stand with? The woman who gave everything, or the world that turned its back? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. In the soft glow of the fading afternoon light, Cora Jenkins sat in her wheelchair beside her modest vegetable garden, her weathered hands gently touching the leaves of her tomato plants. The late summer air hung heavy with humidity, making her cotton dress cling to her skin. Her small patch of earth, though humble, gave her both food and purpose, something she'd needed desperately since losing her husband 3 years ago. The peaceful quiet of Maple Street was broken by an unusual sound, the deep rumble of a motorcycle engine echoing through the neighborhood. Cora lifted her head, watching as curtains twitched in nearby windows. Mrs. Patterson across the street quickly pulled her grandchildren inside, and old Mr. Thompson pretended to check his mail while casting suspicious glances down the road. The motorcycle came into view, its chrome pipes gleaming despite the cloudy sky above. Dark smoke curled from beneath it, and the engine made concerning sounds before the rider guided it to a stop right in front of Cora's faded yellow house. The man astride it was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders covered in a leather vest. His arms were decorated with tattoos, and his beard was thick and unkempt. While others retreated further into their homes, Cora felt a familiar stirring in her heart, the same feeling that had guided her through decades of ministry alongside her late husband. She wheeled herself forward on the concrete path, her voice carrying clearly across her small front yard. "Looks like you need some water." The biker turned toward her voice, his expression guarded beneath his dark sunglasses. For a moment, he seemed to assess her, this black woman in her 50s, sitting in her wheelchair with dirt still on her gardening gloves. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "Bike's running hot," he said gruffly. "Well then, come on up to the house," Cora replied, already turning her chair around. "I've got plenty of water, and you look like you could use something to eat, too." She could hear his heavy boots on the pathway behind her as she led the way to her ramped entrance. The screen door creaked as she pushed through it, leading him into her kitchen where sunlight filtered through faded gingham curtains her husband's mother had made decades ago. The kitchen, like everything else in Cora's life, showed signs of wear but was immaculately clean. Gospel records lined a shelf above the old radio, and a cross-stitched Bible verse hung beside the refrigerator. "Love thy neighbor as thyself." "Have a seat," she gestured to her small kitchen table. "I'm Cora Jenkins." "They call me Grim," he responded, carefully lowering himself into a chair that seemed too delicate for his frame. Cora wheeled to her refrigerator, pulling out a pitcher of sweet tea she'd made that morning. "Well, Mr. Grimm, you're in luck. I've got leftover cornbread and beans from lunch." She didn't wait for his response before gathering the food, moving with practiced ease in her wheelchair. The plate she set before him was simple, but generous. Golden cornbread and beans seasoned with ham hocks, the way her mama had taught her. She poured tea into a glass with hand-painted flowers, ice cubes clinking musically. Grim stared at the food for a long moment, his sunglasses now hooked on his vest, revealing eyes that had seen hard times. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle whir of the ceiling fan above. Finally, he picked up his fork and began to eat. Cora busied herself with small kitchen tasks, giving him space while keeping him company. She hummed softly, an old hymn about amazing grace, as she wiped down her counters and arranged her spice jars. After several minutes, Grimm's deep voice filled the kitchen. "Ain't no one fed me in 20 years." The words seemed to surprise even him, as if they'd escaped without permission. Cora turned toward him, recognizing the weight of that admission. In his voice, she heard echoes of all the lonely souls who'd sat at her table over the years, people her husband had ministered to, folks from the food pantry, lost sheep seeking shelter from various storms. "Well," she said softly, "my mama always said a shared meal is a holy thing." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the afternoon light growing softer as clouds continued to gather outside. When Grimm finally stood to leave, he carefully placed his dishes in the sink, a small gesture that made Cora smile. At the door he paused. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "You're welcome back any time," she replied, and meant it. As the sun began its descent, Cora watched from her porch as Grimm's motorcycle disappeared down Maple Street. The engine sounded better now, no longer smoking. Behind her, she heard the screen door open and close as Marcus returned from his after-school job at the grocery store. "Mama?" His voice held concern as he came to stand beside her wheelchair. "Was that a biker in our kitchen? Mrs. Patterson called to warn me." He looked down at her, his young face serious. "Were you afraid having him here?" Cora reached for her son's hand, squeezing it gently as she watched the last dust settle on the road where Grimm had disappeared. "No, baby," she said thoughtfully, her voice warm and steady. "I'm afraid of forgetting what kindness looks like." Marcus squeezed her hand back, though she could feel his uncertainty. Together they watched the dusk paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, while across the street, neighbors finally emerged from their houses, whispering among themselves about the strange events of the afternoon. In her heart, Cora felt a familiar warmth, the same feeling she'd had years ago when her husband would welcome strangers to their church. It was the certainty that sometimes the most important sermons weren't preached from pulpits, but served with cornbread and sweet tea at a kitchen table. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Cora stirred in her bed. Her eyes opened to an unfamiliar sound growing in the distance, a deep, thunderous rumbling that seemed to make the windows vibrate. She pushed herself up, reaching for her wheelchair with practiced movements. "Marcus?" she called out, but the growing noise drowned her voice. The rumbling grew louder, transforming into the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines, not one or two, but what sounded like an army. Cora wheeled herself quickly to her son's room, finding him already awake and standing at his window, his eyes wide. "Mama," he whispered, "there's so many of them." Cora made her way to the front door, her heart beating faster with each turn of her wheels. As she pushed open the screen door, the sight before her made her breath catch in her throat. Her modest gravel driveway, usually empty except for Marcus's old bicycle, was now lined with motorcycles of every size and style. They stretched beyond her property, down the street, and around the corner. Hundreds of them, their chrome gleaming in the early morning light. The riders were an intimidating sight. Men and women in leather vests covered in patches, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Some had tattoos crawling up their necks, others wore bandanas, and all of them seemed to be looking at her house. Across the street, curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out fearfully. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived there for 30 years, was on her phone, likely calling the authorities. Down the road, a police cruiser was already parked, its lights off, but its presence clear, Sheriff Denton watching from a distance. Through the crowd, a familiar figure emerged. Grimm's tall frame towered over most of the others as he walked his bike to the front of the gathering. He killed the engine and dismounted, raising both hands high above his head. The gesture brought immediate silence to the crowd. "Listen up," his voice boomed across the yard. "This woman gave me food yesterday, didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just showed kindness when nobody else would." He turned to face Cora, his expression solemn. "Nobody hurts her. She's family now." The response was immediate and overwhelming. A cheer went up from the crowd, followed by the synchronized revving of hundreds of engines. The sound was like thunder, rattling windows and setting off car alarms down the street. Cora gripped her wheelchair's armrests, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sheer power of the moment. Inside, she heard Marcus moving anxiously. "Mama, maybe we should call somebody," he said from behind the screen door. "It's all right, baby," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. Was this a blessing or a warning? The line between the two seemed suddenly blurry. By early afternoon, the scene had transformed further. News vans began arriving, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like metal trees. Reporters in pressed suits stood out starkly against the sea of leather and denim, their cameras capturing the unusual tableau: a black woman in a wheelchair at the center of a gathering of predominantly white bikers. Marcus had retreated to his room, watching through the window. Cora understood his fear. It wasn't just about the bikers anymore, but about the attention, the cameras, the way their quiet life was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Still, she did what she'd always done when faced with uncertainty. She chose kindness. She wheeled herself back inside and emerged with 3 thermoses of coffee, offering cups to anyone who wanted them. The bikers accepted with surprising gentleness, many removing their gloves before taking the cups from her hands. "Ma'am," one woman with silver hair and leather chaps said, "you've got no idea what you did for Grimm. He's been carrying darkness for years." As Cora poured coffee and listened to snippets of conversation, she noticed Sheriff Denton approaching. He'd finally left his cruiser, his face set in stern lines as he made his way through the crowd. The bikers parted for him, but their eyes followed his every move. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said quietly when he reached her porch. "Could I have a word?" She nodded, wheeling herself slightly away from the crowd. "You're inviting trouble here," he said, keeping his voice low. "These people, they're not from around here. They don't understand our ways." Cora looked at him steadily, seeing past his badge to the fear and prejudice beneath. "Maybe the trouble's been here longer than they have, Sheriff," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe it's been here so long we stopped seeing it." The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He retreated to his car, where he remained for hours, watching. As the day wore on, the crowd thinned gradually. Some bikers left in small groups, others stayed to share stories or help clean up the coffee cups. Grimm remained, a quiet sentinel at the edge of her property, nodding respectfully whenever their eyes met. By nightfall, the last motorcycles rumbled away, leaving behind only tire tracks in the gravel and the lingering scent of leather and exhaust. The cricket songs, which had been drowned out all day, emerged again, filling the evening air with their familiar chorus. Inside, Cora lit a candle, a habit she'd kept since her husband died, finding comfort in its warm glow. Marcus finally emerged from his room, sitting close to her at the kitchen table. They didn't speak for a long while, both lost in thoughts about how their world had shifted in just 24 hours. "You okay, baby?" Cora finally asked, reaching for her son's hand. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so. It's just, everything's different now, isn't it? Cora looked at the candle flame, watching it dance and flicker. Different doesn't always mean bad, she said softly. Sometimes it just means we're being asked to open our hearts a little wider. They sat together in the candlelight, mother and son, while outside their yellow house, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. The tire tracks in the gravel would remain for days, a reminder that sometimes grace arrives wearing leather and speaking in thunder. The morning sun barely had time to warm the dew when the whispers began. They started at Mabel's beauty salon, spread through the aisles of Johnson's grocery, and reached full bloom by the time the morning prayer group gathered at First Baptist. Did you hear about Cora Jenkins? Martha Wilson's voice carried across the church fellowship hall. She's gotten mixed up with those gangmen on motorcycles, hundreds of them, right there on her property. Lord have mercy, someone muttered, shaking their head. Cora felt the stares as she wheeled herself down Main Street, doing her regular errands. Faces that once smiled now turned away, blinds closed as she passed houses where she'd been welcome for decades. The weight of judgment felt heavier than any load of laundry she'd ever carried. At home, she tried to maintain her routine. Lord, she prayed that morning, hands clasped over her worn Bible, give me strength to be kind when others aren't. The familiar rhythm of household chores brought some comfort, sorting whites from colors, hanging sheets on the line, pulling weeds from between her tomato plants. The doorbell rang just before noon. Pastor Raymond Green stood on her porch, his collar wilting in the heat, hands clasped nervously in front of him. Sister Cora, he began, settling into her offered chair. The church council is concerned. Cora poured him a glass of water, waiting. These men, he continued, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, they have reputations. Criminal records, some say. We need to pray for guidance in this matter. Perhaps it would be best to avoid further contact. Pastor, Cora said quietly, when Jesus ate with sinners, did the Pharisees not say the same? The pastor shifted uncomfortably. These are different times, Sister Cora. We must consider the church's reputation, the community's safety. Before she could respond, the mail truck stopped outside. Through the window, she watched Marcus collect the mail, his shoulders tense as he read one official-looking envelope. Her heart sank when he brought it in. Social services, he said, handing it to her. The letter was cold and formal. Her disability benefits were under review. No explanation given. Pastor Green cleared his throat. I should be going. Do consider what I said, Sister Cora. We'll be praying for you. After he left, Cora sat in silence, the letter heavy in her lap. Years of careful budgeting, of stretching every dollar. And now this. Was it coincidence? Or punishment? When Marcus came home from school later, his face was stormy. He threw his backpack down harder than necessary. They're calling you the biker queen, he spat. Like it's funny, like they know anything about us. Cora wheeled herself to him, reaching for his hand. Words only have the power we give them, baby. But it's not fair. We didn't do anything wrong. No, she agreed softly. We didn't. The sun was setting when they heard motorcycles again. Just 3 this time, moving slowly. Grim and 2 others pulled up, their bikes nearly silent as they idled to a stop. Cora wheeled onto the porch, Marcus hovering protectively behind her. But Grim wasn't looking at them. He was examining her porch railing, where the wood had rotted and split months ago. Got some tools in my saddlebag, he said gruffly. Won't take long to fix this. Cora hesitated. More gossip fodder for the neighbors. More reason for suspicion. But the railing did need fixing, and her budget for repairs had just gotten even tighter. "I'll make some lemonade," she said finally. While the men worked, she could hear their low voices mixing with the sounds of sawing and hammering. Marcus watched from inside, gradually moving closer to the window, curiosity overtaking caution. When the new railing was secure, Cora brought out a pitcher of lemonade and glasses. The other two bikers excused themselves, but Grimm stayed, settling onto the porch steps. In the growing darkness, his massive frame seemed less intimidating somehow. "Lost my family 8 years ago," he said suddenly, staring into his glass. "Drunk driver, coming home from my son's baseball game. Tommy was 12. Sarah, my wife, she was laughing about something when it happened. I never even got to hear the end of her laugh." Cora felt tears welling in her eyes. She knew that kind of loss, the way it hollowed you out, left you searching for pieces of yourself in empty rooms. "I lost everything that day," Grimm continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Started riding just to feel something besides pain. Guess I was the one who needed saving all along." The crickets filled the silence between them. Inside, Marcus had moved to the doorway, listening. "Thank you," Grimm said finally, standing. "For the food yesterday. For not being afraid. Most folks see the leather and the tattoos and make up their minds right quick." After he rode away, Marcus came out to the porch. "Why'd you help him that first day, Mama? Really?" Cora looked out at the darkening yard, where fireflies were beginning to dance. "We don't get to choose who God sends to our door, baby. We just get to choose how we answer." They sat together in the growing dark, watching the fireflies rise from the grass like prayers. The new porch railing stood solid and strong, a reminder that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and healing begins with a simple act of kindness. The days that followed brought a different kind of music to Cora's yard. Not her late husband's gospel records, but the steady rhythm of work and friendship. Small groups of bikers came and went like waves, their leather vests gleaming in the summer sun. On Tuesday morning, 5 riders showed up with paint cans and brushes. The peeling white paint on her porch had bothered Cora for years, but hiring painters was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she watched from her wheelchair as careful hands transformed the weathered wood. "My daddy was a painter," one of the younger bikers said, carefully edging around her window frames. "Taught me everything about doing it right." By Wednesday, another group arrived with a riding mower and trimming tools. The overgrown grass that had shamed Cora all spring disappeared in neat, fragrant rows. The ancient mailbox that listed to one side was straightened and reinforced, its rusty hinges replaced. Laughter drifted through her open windows, deep, genuine sounds she hadn't heard in her yard since before her husband passed. Marcus, though still cautious, began lingering on the porch after school instead of rushing inside. But not everyone saw beauty in this transformation. Thursday afternoon brought unwelcome visitors. Town Councilman Walter Briggs's polished shoes crunched on her gravel driveway, Sheriff Denton at his side. Their faces wore masks of concern that didn't reach their eyes. "Mrs. Jenkins," Councilman Briggs began, his voice honey-smooth but cold, "we've had some complaints about the increased traffic in your neighborhood." Cora's hands folded quietly in her lap. "These men have only helped, Councilman. They've done nothing wrong." Sheriff Denton shifted his weight, thumb hooked in his belt. "It's a matter of public nuisance, ma'am. These aren't the kind of people our town wants to attract." "These people," Cora said softly, "have shown more Christian charity than many who sit in church every Sunday." The councilman's smile tightened. "We're simply concerned for your welfare, Mrs. Jenkins, and the welfare of your neighbors. Perhaps you might discourage future visits?" After they left, Cora sat on her newly painted porch, watching shadows lengthen across her neat lawn. The evening air carried whispers from next door, angry, fearful voices discussing property values and safety concerns. Can't have those people here. Petition the housing board. Grounds for eviction. The words slipped through her window screens like poison. That night, after Marcus went to bed, Cora wheeled herself to the living room where her husband's portrait hung. Tears filled her eyes as she prayed aloud in the darkness. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand. I opened my door like you taught us. I showed kindness like your word says. But it seems to bring nothing but trouble. Help me understand why doing right feels so wrong to others." The next morning, Grimm's weathered truck appeared at the end of her street. He didn't make a show of it, just parked quietly and stayed. When suspicious cars drove by slowly, they kept going at the sight of him. Marcus noticed too. After school, instead of hurrying past, he paused by the truck's window. "You don't have to stay," Marcus said, his voice carrying a mix of defiance and gratitude. Grimm's response was simple. "Yeah, I do." Days passed, and something shifted between them. Marcus began stopping longer, asking questions about the truck's engine. Grimm showed him basic maintenance, explaining with patience that belied his intimidating appearance. "See, you gotta understand what makes it tick," he told Marcus, pointing under the hood. "Engines are honest. They tell you when something's wrong, if you know how to listen." Cora watched from her porch as Marcus absorbed not just mechanics, but something deeper. Lessons about loyalty, about standing ground, about carrying grief without letting it harden your heart. One afternoon, she heard something that made her pause. Marcus laughing. Not his usual guarded chuckle, but a real, unrestrained laugh. Grimm was showing him how to check the oil, and something had struck them both funny. The sound wrapped around Cora's heart like a warm blanket. The house felt different now. The fresh paint gleamed in the sunlight. The grass stood neat and proud. Her fixed mailbox stood straight as a soldier. But it was more than that. There was life here again. A sense of family she thought had died with her husband. Standing on her porch in the golden evening light, Cora ran her hand along the smooth new railing. A group of bikers was leaving for the day, their engines a gentle rumble in the distance. Marcus sat on the steps, oil smudges on his hands from his lesson with Grimm. "Maybe," she whispered, more to herself than anyone, "miracles ride motorcycles." The words hung in the air like a prayer, simple and true. The setting sun painted her restored porch in shades of gold, and for the first time in years, her home felt truly blessed. The morning mail brought a letter that made Cora's hands shake. The official letterhead from the town council seemed to glare up at her from the kitchen table. She read it 3 times, each pass making her heart sink deeper. Notice of property inspection, concerns regarding unauthorized gatherings, potential condemnation due to unsafe conditions. The words blurred as tears threatened to fall. Her modest home, the one she and her late husband had worked so hard to buy, was being threatened because she dared to show kindness. Marcus found her still staring at the letter when he came home from school. "Mama, what's wrong?" She tried to smile, but her voice wavered. "They're saying our house isn't safe, baby. That these gatherings are dangerous." His face darkened with anger. "But the bikers fixed everything. The porch is stronger than ever. They're just making excuses because—" He stopped himself, but Cora knew what he meant. Because they were different. Because she was different. Word spread quickly among the bikers. By sunset, dozens had gathered in her yard, speaking in hushed, serious tones. Grimm stood on her porch, the letter crumpled in his massive fist. "This ain't right," he growled. "We got people, lawyers, contractors, whatever you need. The club's got money set aside for members in trouble." His voice softened. "You're family now, Cora. You helped me when nobody else would. Now we help you." Cora's eyes welled up at his words. These men, whom society feared and judged, were offering more support than she'd seen from her own church family in years. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Grim replied simply. "Let us help." Before she could respond, her phone rang. It was Deaconess Martha Coles, her pinched voice carrying through the receiver. "There's an emergency church board meeting tomorrow night, Sister Jenkins. Your situation needs to be discussed." Marcus, overhearing, grabbed her hand. "Don't go, Mama. They just want to hurt you." But Cora straightened in her wheelchair. "No, baby, I need to go. Running away won't solve anything." The next evening, Marcus helped her dress in her Sunday best, a navy dress with pearl buttons that her husband had always loved. As they pulled up to the church in their old car, the parking lot was unusually full. "I'll be fine," she assured Marcus, who looked ready to fight anyone who might upset her. "God's got me." The fellowship hall was packed with familiar faces that suddenly seemed strange. Whispers followed her as she wheeled down the center aisle. The church board sat at a long table up front, their expressions ranging from concern to outright disapproval. Deaconess Martha stood first, her voice carrying the weight of assumed authority. "Sister Jenkins, we've called this meeting because we're deeply troubled by your recent associations." "They're criminals," another board member added. "The whole town is talking." "What would your dear husband say?" someone called from the crowd. "You're bringing shame on this church," Deaconess Martha declared. "These men are dangerous sinners." The room fell silent as Cora slowly raised her head. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm, carrying to every corner of the hall. "My Jesus ate with sinners," she said clearly. "He touched lepers. He spoke to outcasts. He loved those society rejected." She paused, looking directly at the deaconess. "And if showing that same love brings shame, then perhaps we've forgotten what this church is supposed to be." The silence that followed was absolute. Cora turned her wheelchair around and began moving toward the door. No one spoke. No one moved to stop her. Outside, the night air felt clean in her lungs. And there, lined up along the church parking lot, were 5 motorcycles. Grim and 4 others sat quietly on their bikes, having followed at a distance to ensure her safety. The sight broke something in Cora's heart. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as the bikers started their engines, forming an honor guard around her car as Marcus drove them home. Later that night, as they sat on their porch listening to crickets, Marcus broke the comfortable silence. "Mama," he said softly, "maybe we found our church out here." Cora looked at her son, seeing the wisdom in his young face. She thought about the judgment in the fellowship hall, then about the quiet dignity of the bikers waiting to escort her home. About how sometimes family isn't who you're born to, but who God sends when you need them most. She reached over and squeezed his hand, letting the peace of the evening wash over them. The stars twinkled above their small house, and somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle's engine rumbled like a prayer. The days melted into a new rhythm, as natural as breathing. Cora's modest yellow house became a sanctuary of sorts, not just for her and Marcus, but for the unlikely family that had formed around them. Every morning she'd wheel onto her porch, Bible in hand, ready to greet whoever might rumble up her driveway. The bikers came in 2s and 3s, their leather vests creaking as they sat cross-legged on her lawn or leaned against their bikes. Before they'd head out, she'd lead them in prayer, her gentle voice carrying across the dewy grass. "Lord, keep them safe on the road," she'd say, while rough hands clasped together and heads bowed. "Guide their wheels and guard their hearts." The sweet potato pies became a tradition. She'd bake them using her mother's recipe, the aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg drawing bikers like moths to a flame. They'd gather around her kitchen table, these tough men with weathered faces, eating pie and sharing stories they'd never told anyone else. One afternoon, a wiry man with graying temples who called himself Rusty sat at her table, his hands trembling slightly as he held his fork. 23 years behind bars, he said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. Nobody ever looked me in the eye after that. Nobody except you, Mama Cora. Cora reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're somebody's son," she said firmly, "and now you're mine too." Rusty's eyes filled with tears. "First time anyone's called me son since I was 18, he whispered. Word spread through the brotherhood about the woman in the wheelchair who saw past their scars and tattoos to the wounded hearts beneath. They called her their angel, their mama, their miracle. Some brought her groceries, others fixed things around the house. The brotherhood had found something they never knew they needed, a mother's love. But while love bloomed within her fence line, darkness grew beyond it. One morning, Marcus discovered the spray-painted words on their fence. "Angel trash," in angry red letters. He tried to paint over it before his mother saw, but Cora had already wheeled herself out to sea. "Leave it," she said softly. "Let them show who they really are." The local news didn't help. Channel 5 ran a story titled, "Biker Gang Sympathizer Disrupts Quiet Neighborhood." They showed footage of motorcycles lined up along her street, interviewing nervous neighbors who spoke of noise and danger. The reporter called her controversial figure Cora Jenkins, in a tone that made it sound like an accusation. Marcus paced the living room after watching the news, his young face tight with anger. "It's not fair, Mama. You haven't done anything wrong." Cora wheeled closer to him, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Perfect love casteth out fear," she quoted, her voice steady. 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. "They're scared, baby. Fear makes people cruel sometimes." Meanwhile, Grimm struggled with his own battles. He'd park his bike in her driveway, watching Marcus work on homework at the kitchen table, listening to Cora hum gospel songs as she cooked. Something in his heart ached for this simple peace, but his duties as a club leader pulled at him like an undertow. One evening, as cicadas filled the air with their endless song, he sat with Cora on her porch. The setting sun painted everything gold, making even the peeling paint look beautiful. "Been thinking," he said slowly, his voice rough with emotion, "about what you said that first day, about kindness." He paused, searching for words. "Never thought I could be different. After losing my family, I just went dark inside. But you—" He looked at her, his eyes vulnerable. "You make me believe people can change." Cora smiled, her face glowing in the dying light. "We already have," she began, but her words were cut short by the sharp crack of breaking glass. Marcus burst through the front door as Grimm leaped to his feet. A rock lay among the shattered remains of their living room window, wrapped in paper. With shaking hands, Marcus unfolded the note and read it aloud. "Leave before it's too late." Grimm's face darkened with fury, but Cora remained still, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the broken glass catching the last rays of sunset, turning them into diamonds on her floor. In that moment, she understood that sometimes the price of love is fear, and sometimes the cost of faith is standing still when the world tells you to run. The cicadas continued their song, oblivious to the broken glass and broken hearts, their chorus a reminder that life goes on, change comes, and love persists, even in the face of hate. The evening wrapped around them like a heavy blanket as they cleaned up the glass together. The retired biker, the wheelchair-bound mother, and the boy becoming a man too soon. Each piece they picked up was a testament to their strange, beautiful family, forged in the fire of adversity and bound by something stronger than blood. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when pickup trucks started arriving at Cora's house. Grim had rallied his brothers at dawn, bringing tools, lumber, and determination to fortify her home. The broken window was just the beginning. They intended to make sure nothing like that would happen again. "We're putting in reinforced glass," Grim explained as he helped Cora make coffee for the workers. "Special order. Nobody's throwing rocks through this one." His voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard, still angry about the previous night's attack. Through her kitchen window, Cora watched the bikers work. Some wore their leather cuts despite the growing heat, while others had stripped down to sleeveless shirts that revealed tattoos and scars. They moved with purpose, measuring twice, cutting once, their rough hands careful with her property. "Look at them, Marcus," she said softly to her son, who stood beside her wheelchair. "God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" Marcus nodded, but his face remained worried. What if whoever threw that rock comes back? Before Cora could answer, a police cruiser pulled up. Sheriff Denton stepped out, his badge catching the morning light. He walked with measured steps through the workers, who paused their tasks to watch him. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, holding out an official-looking envelope. "This is a written warning about unregistered gatherings on your property. Town ordinance requires permits for groups over 15 people." Cora took the envelope with steady hands. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll keep that in mind when I'm counting my dinner guests." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke, Mrs. Jenkins. There are concerns about safety, about who you're associating with." Grim appeared beside Cora's wheelchair, his massive frame casting a shadow. "Everything here is perfectly safe, Sheriff. We're just fixing a window some coward broke." After the sheriff left, Grim knelt beside Cora's chair, his voice low and serious. "There's something else you should know. Word's getting around about this place. Other clubs, ones that don't like us much, they're taking notice. This house, what you're doing, it's becoming something bigger than just helping out a few bikers." Cora looked at the morning sun climbing higher. "Then we'll pray harder," she said simply. By afternoon, the window was fixed, stronger than before. The fence had been reinforced with extra posts and security lights installed at strategic points. The bikers had even added a ramp beside her porch steps, making it easier for her wheelchair. Despite the warnings and threats, Cora announced her plans for Sunday. "Prayer circle will be on the porch, as always," she declared. 8 o'clock sharp. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Cora wheeled herself onto the porch early, wearing her best church dress, her Bible in her lap. Marcus arranged chairs in a semicircle, though he wondered if anyone would come. They came. One by one, motorcycles rumbled up her driveway. Dozens of them. The men dismounted, removing their helmets with unexpected reverence. They wore their cuts clean and pressed, as if for church. Some brought their wives, a few even brought children. They filled her porch, her yard, spilling onto the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked through windows. Some even stood on their lawns to watch. The sheriff's cruiser drove by twice, but didn't stop. Cora opened her Bible to Psalms, her voice clear and strong in the morning air. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The bikers bowed their heads, leather creaking as they shifted. Some closed their eyes, others wiped them secretly. Even Marcus, who usually fidgeted during prayer, stood still and listening. "The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" A baby cooed somewhere in the crowd. Birds sang in the trees. The morning sun warmed their shoulders as Cora's words washed over them, healing old wounds, soothing ancient hurts. When she finished reading, she looked out at the gathered faces, faces that society had labeled dangerous, unworthy, lost. She saw only children of God. "The Lord sent angels in leather today," she said softly, a smile touching her lips. Laughter rippled through the crowd, gentle and genuine. Something shifted in that moment, like a weight lifting, like chains falling away. Even the neighbors watching seemed to feel it. This wasn't a gang meeting. This was something holy. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Marcus brought in an envelope he'd found tucked under their door. Inside was $2,000 in cash and a handwritten note. "For the woman who showed us how to live again." Cora held the money with trembling hands, tears filling her eyes. Marcus watched her wheel herself to her bedroom, where she closed the door softly. Through the thin walls, he could hear her crying and praying, thanking God for kindness that came wrapped in unexpected packages. The money would help with bills, with repairs, with Marcus's college applications. But the note, those words written in rough handwriting, meant more than any amount of cash. It was proof that love could transform, that mercy could heal, that God's grace could flow through the most unlikely channels. That night, as crickets sang their evening song and security lights cast soft glows in the yard, Cora sat on her porch. The reinforced window gleamed behind her. The new fence stood strong around her. But it wasn't these physical barriers that made her feel safe. It was the knowledge that sometimes family isn't born. It's chosen, built one act of kindness at a time, stronger than blood, deeper than fear. The stars emerged one by one, blessing the quiet street with their ancient light. In the distance, a motorcycle rumbled, not a threat anymore, but a reminder that love comes in many forms, that angels sometimes wear leather, and that God's work doesn't always look the way we expect it to. The late summer weeks drifted by like dandelion seeds on the breeze. Life settled into an almost peaceful rhythm at Cora's yellow house. The bikers came and went quietly now, mindful of the neighbors. Some even waved as they passed. The tension that had gripped the street began to ease, like a long-held breath finally released. Cora spent her days tending her garden, which was flourishing with the extra help. Marcus had started smiling more, his shoulders less tense. Even the church ladies who had shunned her were beginning to nod politely when they saw her at the grocery store. But peace, like a butterfly, can be fragile. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Cora was heating leftover chicken soup when the phone rang. Marcus answered it, and she watched his face drain of color. "Mama," he said, his voice shaking. "It's about Grim." The news struck like lightning. A rival gang had ambushed Grim on the outskirts of town. They'd waited until he was alone, leaving Miller's gas station. 6 men against 1. The radio crackled with updates as Cora and Marcus listened, frozen in their kitchen. Cora's hands trembled as she gripped her wheelchair arms. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Lord, not him too." The words escaped like a wounded prayer, echoing her loss of her husband years before. Marcus had never seen his mother break down like this, not since Dad died. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile under fluorescent lights. Cora's wheelchair squeaked slightly as Marcus pushed her down the hallway to room 312. Outside, dozens of bikers stood guard, their faces grim and watchful. Inside, Grim lay on white sheets that made his tattoos seem darker, his skin paler. Purple bruises bloomed across his face, and his right arm was in a cast, but his eyes were open, alert, and filled with shame when he saw Cora. "You shouldn't have come," he said hoarsely. "Hush now," Cora replied, wheeling closer. Her voice was gentle but firm, like a mother scolding a child. "I should have stayed gone," Grim continued, looking away. "Brought nothing but trouble to your door. Got too comfortable, too careless. Forgot who I was, what follows me." Cora reached out and took his good hand, her dark fingers contrasting with his pale ones. "If you'd stayed gone, you'd have stayed lost," she said softly. "And that would have been the real tragedy." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Marcus watched from the doorway, seeing something shift in Grim's expression, like a wall crumbling. But the next morning brought new storms. 2 police cars and a city inspector arrived at Cora's house before breakfast. The inspector, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, held up official-looking papers. "This property has been deemed unsafe for habitation," he announced, not quite meeting Cora's eyes. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." News vans appeared within the hour, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters crowded her yard, shoving microphones toward her face, asking about gang violence and property values. "Mrs. Jenkins, do you feel responsible for bringing criminal elements into this peaceful neighborhood? Are you aware of the danger you've posed to local children? Has your church made any statement about your involvement with known criminals?" That last question stung the most. The church she'd attended for 30 years remained silent. No calls, no visits, no offers of help. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in her chest. That evening, after Marcus had shooed away the last reporter, Cora felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. Not just in people, but in her faith itself. The weight of it pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. She rolled her wheelchair onto the porch, away from the leftover dinner dishes and the stack of legal notices on her kitchen table. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamond dust. She remembered nights like this with her husband, when they'd sit together and talk about God's magnificence written in the heavens. "Are you still listening, Lord?" she whispered to the stars. Her voice cracked on the words. For the first time since her husband died, she felt truly alone. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Marcus's footsteps crossed the porch, and she felt his warm hand on her shoulder. Her son, who'd grown so tall, so strong, yet still carried such gentleness in his heart. "Mama," he said softly, "maybe God's waiting for you to see you already answered someone's prayer." Cora reached up and covered his hand with hers, feeling the truth of his words sink deep into her soul. She thought of Grim in his hospital bed, of the bikers who'd found family in her yard, of the note that had said she'd shown them how to live again. The stars continued their silent vigil overhead, watching over a woman in a wheelchair, her son standing beside her, both of them learning that sometimes faith works in ways we never expect, and prayers are answered through the very people we reach out to help. Through the open windows came the distant rumble of motorcycles, her unlikely congregation heading home for the night, keeping watch over their chosen family. The sound didn't frighten her anymore. Instead, it reminded her that love could wear leather, that grace could ride a Harley, and that God's light could shine through the darkest nights. Dawn broke over Cora's yellow house, painting the worn clapboards in soft gold. She'd been awake for hours, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, watching the sky change colors. The sound of footsteps on her porch made her heart skip. Not the heavy boots of bikers, but the precise click of official shoes. Through the window, she watched a man in a brown uniform nail a bright orange notice to her front door. The hollow thud of each hammer strike echoed through her chest. When he left, she wheeled herself out slowly, the morning dew dampening her wheels. The notice was stark and official. Eviction order. 72 hours. The words blurred before her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over her, like the quiet after a storm. "Mama?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, his young face creased with worry. "Get ready for school, baby," she said softly. "We're going to visit Grim after." The hospital corridors were quieter today. Fewer bikers stood guard. Most had gone to work or home to sleep. The ones who remained nodded respectfully as Cora wheeled past, Marcus pushing her chair. Grim looked better, sitting up against white pillows. The bruises on his face had deepened to purple-black, but his eyes were clearer. A half-eaten breakfast tray sat forgotten beside him. "You didn't have to come," he said gruffly, but Cora could hear the gratitude beneath the words. She pulled out her worn Bible, its pages soft from years of handling. "The Lord gave me something to share today," she said, turning to Isaiah. The familiar pages rustled like whispered prayers. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength," she read, her voice steady and clear in the sterile room. "They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." Grim's rough hand trembled on the blanket as he listened. Marcus stood by the window, watching clouds drift past, while Cora continued reading. The words filled the room like gentle music, speaking of hope and renewal, of strength found in waiting. When she finished, Grim's eyes were wet. "Never had much use for the good book before," he said quietly. "But when you read it, makes a man think different." Meanwhile, beyond the hospital walls, something was stirring. Photos of Cora serving coffee to bikers, praying with them on her porch, sharing her simple meals. They were spreading across the internet like wildfire. Someone had posted her story. Mama Cora's losing her house. The tale of a wheelchair-bound widow who opened her heart to society's outcasts touched something deep in people's souls. Messages began appearing online. "Stand with Mama Cora. Love knows no labels. She showed us what Jesus would do." The story was picked up by motorcycle forums, shared in church groups, passed between friends. When Cora wheeled herself home that afternoon, she noticed a change in her neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, who'd once hurried inside when bikers appeared, stood on her porch with a basket of fresh vegetables. "From my garden," she said hesitantly. "Thought you might need some help with meals. What with everything?" Throughout the evening, more neighbors came. Some brought casseroles, others offered apologetic smiles and awkward words of support. Even Mr. Thompson, who'd threatened to start that petition, stopped by with a gallon of milk and a mumbled, "We've been thinking wrong about some things." As darkness fell, the familiar rumble of motorcycles returned. Softer now, just 3 or 4 bikes. They parked quietly outside her fence, engines cutting off into silence. Cora recognized them, local guys who worked at the auto shop downtown. One of them, a younger man named Pete, approached her porch. "Hope you don't mind, Mama Cora," he said, shuffling his feet. "We thought we'd stay close tonight, just in case." Cora looked at these men, who'd found something worth protecting in her simple acts of kindness. "There's fresh coffee inside," she said, "and some of Mrs. Patterson's cornbread." They settled in for the night watch, their presence both comforting and symbolic. The air felt heavy with possibility, like the charged atmosphere before a thunderstorm. But Cora wasn't afraid. She'd seen how God could turn storms into blessings, how faith could build bridges across the deepest divides. Marcus helped her get ready for bed, his movements gentle and sure. "You okay, Mama?" he asked, adjusting her pillows. "I'm at peace, baby," she replied, touching his cheek. "Whatever comes tomorrow, we're not alone anymore." Through her window, she could see the bikers' cigarettes glowing like fireflies in the dark. From other houses came soft lights and movement, neighbors keeping watch in their own way. The night settled around them all like a protective blanket, while stars wheeled overhead and crickets sang their endless song. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The peaceful dawn was shattered by the harsh growl of diesel engines. 3 large yellow bulldozers lined up at the end of Cora's street like angry beasts, their metal tracks gleaming in the early light. Cora heard them coming. She took her time getting ready, saying her morning prayers as usual. When she finally wheeled herself onto the porch, she held her old Bible in her lap, the same one she'd read to Grim in the hospital. Its leather cover was smooth from years of handling, its pages marked with colored tabs and handwritten notes. Sheriff Denton's patrol car pulled up first, kicking up gravel as it stopped. He stepped out, adjusting his badge in the morning light. His face was tight with determination as he walked toward her porch. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, trying to sound kind but firm. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just make this easy on everyone." Cora looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady. The morning breeze rustled the pages of her Bible as she spoke. "You can take the boards, Sheriff," she said gently, "but you can't take my home. Home isn't just wood and nails, it's love and memories and mercy." Before the sheriff could respond, a distant sound caught their attention. At first it was just a low rumble, like far-off thunder, but it grew steadily louder, building into a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. They came in waves, first dozens, then hundreds of motorcycles. They filled the street, then the neighboring streets, then every possible space around Cora's property. Their chrome gleamed in the morning sun as they arranged themselves in neat rows. By mid-morning, over 800 bikers had gathered, their engines idling in perfect unity, creating a wall of sound that spoke of protection and solidarity. News helicopters appeared overhead, their rotors chopping through the morning air. Camera crews rushed to set up their equipment, capturing the extraordinary scene unfolding in this small southern town. Reporters spoke urgently into microphones, trying to explain how a disabled widow's kindness had sparked such an unprecedented gathering. Then a white van pulled up slowly through the crowd. The bikers parted to make way, and the door slid open. Grim emerged, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His face was still bruised, and he moved with obvious pain, but his eyes blazed with purpose. He made his way toward Cora's porch, each step deliberate and determined. The cameras swung toward him as he turned to face the bulldozers and the sheriff. His voice carried across the crowd, strong despite his injuries. "This woman," he declared, pointing to Cora with his free hand, "showed us mercy when nobody else would. She saw past our leather and our scars. She fed us, prayed for us, called us family." He paused, drawing himself up to his full height despite the pain. "You'll have to go through all of us to move her." The crowd erupted in cheers, 800 voices raised in support. The sound was deafening, a thunder of approval that seemed to shake the very ground. Bikers raised their fists, revved their engines, honked their horns in solidarity. Sheriff Denton stood very still, looking from the bikers to Cora and back again. Something in his face changed, a softening around the eyes, a slight lowering of his shoulders. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and gave a signal to the bulldozer crews. The diesel engines fell silent one by one. The news helicopters drifted away. And suddenly, there was silence, a profound stillness that felt heavy with meaning. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, full of possibility and change. The morning sun touched everything with golden light. The bikers in their leather, the sheriff in his uniform, Cora in her wheelchair with her Bible in her lap. In that sacred stillness, victory felt as gentle as a prayer answered, as powerful as hundreds of hearts, beating as one. The silence spoke of something larger than just saving a house. It whispered of bridges built, of prejudices overcome, of love proving stronger than fear. The story of Cora Jenkins and her 800 protectors spread like wildfire across America. Social media exploded with videos of the standoff, showing the determined woman in her wheelchair, Bible in hand, facing down bulldozers with an army of bikers behind her. News networks picked up the story, broadcasting images of this unlikely alliance between a disabled Black Widow and hundreds of leather-clad guardians. By sunset, donations started flooding in through hastily created online fundraisers. People from all 50 states contributed. $5 here, $20 there, some giving hundreds. Messages of support accompanied each donation. Stand strong, Mama Cora. God bless you for showing us true Christianity. You remind us what America should be. Within 48 hours, local officials called an emergency meeting. They emerged with a statement withdrawing the eviction notice, citing community benefit and historical significance of the property. The mayor himself delivered the news to Cora's porch, cameras rolling as he handed her the official document. But it was the church members who made the most dramatic turnaround. They came in small groups at first, a deaconess with tears in her eyes, bringing a casserole, 3 elderly ladies clutching handwritten apology notes, younger families with children bearing hand-drawn cards. Pastor Green's visit was the most moving. He came alone one morning, looking smaller somehow, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Cora welcomed him with the same warmth she showed everyone, wheeling back to make space for him on her porch. "Sister Cora," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you reminded us what the gospel really looks like. We were so busy protecting our reputation that we forgot about protecting people." He wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. "I failed as your pastor. I failed as Christ's servant." Cora reached out and took his trembling hand. "The Lord's mercy is new every morning," she said softly. "And so is mine." The bikers, meanwhile, transformed her property with loving hands. They rebuilt her porch, making it wider and stronger, with a gentle ramp that made it easier for her wheelchair. On the side of her yellow house, facing the street, they painted a stunning mural, massive angel wings spreading from ground to roofline, each feather detailed in shades of gold and silver. Grim, still moving carefully as he recovered from his injuries, became a fixture in her yard. He spent quiet evenings teaching Marcus about engines, their heads bent together over an old motor they'd salvaged. The sound of their laughter mixed with the clinking of tools became as natural as bird song. Her yard changed too. String lights appeared, zigzagging overhead like stars brought down to earth. Picnic tables sprouted up, and somehow there was always food. Church ladies' casseroles beside bikers' barbecue, fancy store-bought cakes next to homemade pies. One warm evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Cora looked out at her yard filled with people. Bikers in leather vests sat shoulder to shoulder with church deacons. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag. Neighbors who once called the police about suspicious gatherings now passed plates of fried chicken and bowls of potato salad. She raised her voice, and the crowd fell quiet. "Look at us," she said, her eyes bright with joy. "We were strangers once, but God saw a family. He knew what we could be before we did." The gathering erupted in cheers. Grim, sitting near her with his cane propped against his chair, raised his plastic cup of sweet tea. "To Mama Cora," he called out, his voice strong with emotion. "To Mama Cora," the crowd echoed, hundreds of cups lifting to the evening sky. The string lights twinkled overhead, and the angel wings on the wall seemed to glow in the gathering dusk, as if blessing this unlikely family brought together by one woman's unfailing kindness. 3 weeks after the standoff, peace settled over Cora Jenkins's little yellow house, like a soft blanket. The late summer air carried the sweet scent of fresh paint and newly cut grass. Her yard, once trampled by hundreds of boots and tires, had healed itself. Fresh green shoots pushed through the earth, and wildflowers dotted the edges of her garden where Marcus had scattered seeds. The porch gleamed with 2 coats of pristine white paint, a weekend project that had brought together an unlikely crew of church deacons and tattooed bikers working side by side. The Angel Wings mural on the side of the house caught the sunlight, its metallic highlights shimming like real feathers in the breeze. One quiet morning, Cora sat at her kitchen table, carefully writing in her neat handwriting. The local newspaper had asked her to share her story, and after much prayer, she agreed. Her words flowed onto the paper like gentle rain. "Love starts with a simple meal. That's what my mama always said, and that's what I believed when I offered a tired stranger some water and cornbread. I didn't know that one act of kindness would ripple out like stones thrown in a pond, touching hundreds of lives. But God knew. He always knows." To those who wonder why I opened my door that day, I say this: kindness isn't a choice, it's a calling. When we feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, and love those society fears, we're doing more than charity. We're healing old wounds, building new bridges, and showing what grace looks like in a world that's forgotten its power. My yard isn't just a gathering place anymore. It's holy ground where miracles happen daily. I've seen former enemies share meals, watched hardened hearts soften, and witnessed God's love break down walls we thought would stand forever. To my neighbors who once feared these changes, thank you for opening your hearts. To my church family who found their way back to true fellowship, welcome home. And to my angels in leather who showed us all what loyalty means, you've taught this old preacher's wife that God's messengers come in all forms, sometimes wearing boots instead of wings. As the sun began its descent that evening, Cora wheeled herself onto her porch. The air was honey-sweet with the perfume of late-blooming jasmine that climbed her new railings. Her familiar rocking chairs were occupied by a mixture of regular visitors, church ladies, neighbor children, and always, a few bikers who'd made her home their sanctuary. Down the road, a long line of motorcycles sat quietly idling. Their chrome parts caught the golden light, transforming them into something almost ethereal. These weren't guards posted from fear anymore. They were family staying close from love. Every few days, the faces would change as riders came and went, but someone always remained, keeping watch over their Mama Cora. Marcus settled onto the porch step beside her wheelchair, his growing frame still somehow finding that boyish way of leaning against her like he did when he was small. The setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and rose, turning the ordinary moment into something precious and rare. "Mama," he said softly, resting his head against her arm. His voice carried the thoughtful tone she'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was wrestling with big questions. "You think God sends people like them often?" Cora's hand found its way to her son's hair, gently stroking the tight curls like she used to when he was little. She looked out at the bikers, these rough men with gentle hearts who'd become their protectors and friends. She thought of Grim, who now came by 3 times a week to help Marcus with his college applications. She remembered how they'd all changed, herself included. "All the time, baby," she said, her voice warm with certainty. "We just don't always recognize his disguise." The evening wind picked up, rustling through the leaves of her old oak tree. One by one, the motorcycles started pulling away, their engines a low, respectful rumble in deference to the quiet neighborhood. The sound faded gradually, like distant thunder rolling away, leaving behind a peaceful silence. As the golden light softened into purple dusk, fireflies began to rise from her garden, tiny lights dancing in the growing darkness. The string lights overhead clicked on automatically, casting a gentle glow over the porch. Marcus remained beside her, both of them watching the last streaks of sunset paint the sky. This was peace, not the fragile kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the deep, lasting peace that comes after storms, after standing your ground, after learning that love is stronger than fear. It was the peace of found family, of faith proved true, of hearts that had grown large enough to hold both old traditions and new beginnings. The crickets began their evening song, a sweet harmony to the gentle creaking of Cora's porch swing, where two bikers sat talking quietly with her next-door neighbor. The scene before her was everything she'd prayed for, and nothing she'd expected. Proof that God's answers to prayer often came packaged in surprising ways. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.